Every spring, I see the same thing happen down at the local farm supply store. Good folks, neighbors of mine, standing in the aisle with their carts loaded down with heavy plastic jugs. They are buying the modern chemical sprays, the multi-layered traps, and the specialized fertilizers, spending 40, 50, sometimes $100 just to keep a few fruit trees and a small vegetable patch whole. It has become a modern ritual, this belief that every trouble in the dirt requires a complex, expensive bottle from a laboratory. We have been taught to reach for the catalog and the credit card the moment a leaf turns yellow or a pest shows its face. But if you stop and think, you have to ask yourself a simple question. How did the old people manage a century ago? Long before these plastic jugs and corporate formulas ever existed, they grew bountiful harvests, kept their homes clean, and preserved their timber using plain things that sat quietly in the pantry. There is a little cardboard box that has sat in American cupboards for over 130 years. It costs a couple of dollars at any grocery store, and most folks today use it for the laundry, completely unaware of the half of what it can do. This plain white powder, simple borax, is one of the most useful things a gardener and a homesteader can keep on hand. For generations, the plain people of Lancaster County and beyond leaned on it hard to solve a whole host of pests and troubles about the homestead. Now I am someone who believes in testing things with my own two hands. I don't rely on what the internet says. I rely on what works in the dirt out behind my shed. My family has kept up this place for a very long time, and I have personally tested these old ways. But let me give you an honest limit right at the start, because I will not sell you a miracle. Borax is a wonderful tool, but it is not a magic dust that fixes everything. It will not cure a viral plant disease, it won't stop a plague of locusts, and if you use it carelessly, it can do more harm than good. Understand this, borax is a natural mineral salt, sodium tetraborate decahydrate, dug right out of the dry lake beds of the western deserts. Because it is a salt, the law of the soil is strict. In small, measured amounts, it is a remedy. In large amounts, it is a poison. A little does good, but a lot will burn a plant to the ground and sour a patch of earth so deeply that nothing will grow there for 2 seasons. The old people understood that the difference between a medicine and a poison is always just the dose. They measured it in level spoons, never heaping and never by guess. Modern agricultural research from our state universities confirms exactly what our grandfathers knew by sight. They have studied the trace minerals in the soil and found that boron, the base element in this powder, is absolutely essential for plant life. Think of it like vitamins in the human body. You need only a microscopic speck, a mere whisper of it, for the cells of a plant to divide and for fruit to set properly. Without it, your crops fail in strange ways. I remember a summer years ago when my neighbor's beets came out of the ground looking stunted, with dry, corky black spots right through the center. His cauliflower heads were turning a sickly brown, and his tomato blossoms were simply dropping off the vines without ever turning into fruit. He was ready to plow the whole bed under and start over, believing some mysterious blight had ruined his soil. He was about to drive to town to buy an expensive load of commercial additives. I walked over to his fence line, looked at those brown cauliflower stems, and told him to hold on. I went back to my porch, brought out that familiar $2 box, and showed him the old way to feed the ground. We didn't use a sack or a heavy machine. We used a single level tablespoon of that white powder, dissolved into a clean bucket of water, spread evenly across his entire garden patch. By the next season, his tomatoes were heavy with fruit, and his beets were as sweet and solid as any you'd find at a market. But feeding the ground is only the beginning of what this mineral can do. The old people used it to defend their homes from the inside out, turning the very nature of the pests against themselves. They used it to clear the kitchen of ants without ever spraying a single chemical near the bread box. They used it to draw the moisture clean out of the slugs that ruin the hostas and lettuce by night, acting like a protective wall around the garden beds. They worked it deep into the fibers of the carpets in early summer to break the flea cycle when the dogs brought the trouble inside, and they dusted a thin, hidden line of it behind the heavy iron stoves to quiet the cockroaches. More than that, the old orchard men knew a secret about this powder that the modern catalogs would rather you forgot. They knew how to use it in the dead of winter, when the snow was still on the ground and the trees were completely bare, to protect the upcoming apple crop from the worm that ruins the core. They could ensure a clean harvest for pennies, using nothing more than a paintbrush and a bucket, saving them from buying expensive traps and toxic sprays month after month. Every one of these traditional uses relies on understanding the exact balance of the powder, knowing how it behaves when it meets an insect's shell, how it dissolves in warm water, and how it interacts with the wood of your barns and fence posts to stop termites before they can even begin to chew. I have mapped out exactly 11 of these traditional, cheap uses that have kept our homestead running for generations. I want to show you the precise measurements, the safety steps, and the exact way to apply it, so you never risk burning your soil or harming your plants. I want to show you how to mix the sweet bait that the worker ants will carry down into the darkness of their own nest, solving the problem from the inside out while you simply stand back and watch. The bucket is sitting right here on my workbench. The water is warm and the box is open. Let me show you exactly how we mix it and how you can start using it on your own place this very afternoon. Let us start with the kitchen sink, where the ants always seem to find the sugar bowl first. When the spring rains come and the first scout ants show up on your counter, the common reaction is to reach for a can of bug spray and wipe them out on the spot. But if you do that, you have missed the whole opportunity. The old people knew that killing the 3 ants you see does nothing to stop the 1,000 ants you cannot see. Here is the exact method my mother used, and it is a piece of pure strategy. You take a clean glass jar and fill it with 1 cup of warm water. Into that water, you stir a good half cup of plain white sugar, and then you add exactly 1 level teaspoon of borax powder. You stir that mixture until the liquid runs perfectly clear, with no grains left at the bottom. Then, you take a couple of ordinary cotton balls, soak them thoroughly in that sweet water, and set them on a small jar lid right in the middle of the ant trail. Now, stop and think, and prepare yourself for the hardest part of this method. You must leave those ants completely alone. Do not squash them. Do not wipe the counter with bleach. You want those workers to crowd around that jar lid and drink their fill. The amount of borax in that water is carefully balanced. It is not strong enough to kill the ant on the spot. Instead, it gives them just enough time to carry that sweet liquid all the way back down into the earth, deep into the hidden heart of the nest. There, they feed it to the queen and the young. Within 2 or 3 days, the borax does its work from the inside out, and the entire colony simply vanishes. You have used the pests as your own delivery men, carrying their own end home to a place your hand could never reach. Once the inside of the house is quiet, you walk out to the garden beds, where the slugs and snails leave their silver slime trails and chew your lettuce leaves to ribbons overnight. Most folks buy those expensive green chemical pellets from the store, but those pellets can be hazardous to the songbirds and the neighborhood cats. Instead, you can use the dry powder to build a defensive wall. You take the box of borax out to the garden on a dry afternoon. You carefully sprinkle a thin, continuous ring of the dry powder right around the base of your vulnerable plants, your hostas, your cabbages, or your strawberries. This ring should be about a ½ inch wide and kept roughly 2 inches away from the stem of the plant itself. A slug's body is almost entirely made of moisture, and it cannot cross that line of mineral salt without being dried out, much like common table salt would do. But unlike table salt, which dissolves instantly and ruins the soil structure, a thin line of borax stays put much longer. You must renew it after a heavy driving rain, but so long as that ring is dry and intact, no slug will cross it to reach your crop. Keep it clean, keep it thin, and use only what is needed. When the trouble moves from the dirt into the house by way of the dog, you look to the carpets. Fleas are a stubborn misery because their eggs drop deep down into the base of the carpet fibers, where common liquid sprays can never penetrate. My grandfather taught me a trick that breaks that breeding cycle for pennies. You take the dry borax powder and lightly dust it across the entire carpeted floor. Then, you take a stiff bristled kitchen broom and work that powder down deep, pushing it past the surface pile right down to the backing where the flea larvae hide. You let that dry powder sit in the carpet for a full 24 hours. During that time, the fine mineral dust absorbs the moisture from the flea eggs and the young larvae, stopping the next generation before it can hatch. After a day has passed, you take your vacuum cleaner and thoroughly clean the entire room, pulling up the dry powder along with the spent pests. You must keep the pets and the little children out of that room while the powder sits. But once it is vacuumed away, you have broken the summer flea cycle without introducing a single chemical vapor into your living space. The fourth way is for the old farmhouses that always seem to harbor a few cockroaches in the dark spaces behind the cupboards. For this, you mix equal parts of borax powder and plain white flour, or borax and powdered sugar. You place this dry mixture into an old spice shaker and dust a very fine, thin line of it along the back edges of your pantry shelves, underneath the stove, and directly behind the refrigerator, the hidden pathways where only the roaches travel. The roach walks through the dust, and because it is a cleanly creature in its own way, it immediately grooms the powder off its legs using its mouth. It swallows the mineral, and within 48 hours, its internal systems are finished. But as we move to the fifth use, we leave the pests behind and talk about the life of the plants themselves. This is the use where I must give you the firmest warning, for it is the line between a beautiful harvest and a dead garden bed. Your soil requires a tiny trace of the element boron to allow plants to form thick cell walls and move sugars from the leaves down into the roots. Tomatoes, beets, cauliflower, and celery are particularly greedy for it. If your soil is starved of it, your tomatoes will drop their blossoms without ever forming fruit, and your celery stalks will split open and turn brown. To fix a boron deficiency, the measure must be absolute. You dissolve exactly 1 level tablespoon of borax into 2 gallons of water. You stir it until it is fully incorporated, and then you use a watering can to distribute that water evenly over a large garden bed, roughly 100 square feet in size. You do this just once a year, early in the spring before anything is planted. Listen to me close on this. Do not double the dose. Do not think that if a tablespoon helps, a cupful will help more. Too much boron acts as a total sterilizer. If you pour a heavy concentration of this powder onto the earth, you will kill every green thing and ensure that nothing, not even a weed, will grow in that spot for years to come. Used with a strict hand, it gives you the heaviest tomato yield you have ever seen. Used with a careless hand, it ruins your soil. Respect that boundary completely. Now let us walk out to the outbuildings, the fence lines, and the woodpile, where a different kind of trouble hides. The sixth use of this plain white powder is against the wood-boring insects, the termites and carpenter ants that can quietly turn the sill beams of an old shed or the posts of a garden fence into hollow dust. The commercial catalogs will gladly sell you expensive liquid wood preservatives in heavy metal cans, but if you look closely at the active ingredients on those dear bottles, you will often find it is largely the same mineral base we are using here. To protect your timber the old way, you mix a highly concentrated solution. You take 1 part of borax powder and dissolve it into 8 parts of very hot water, stirring it thoroughly until the water cannot hold any more of the white crystals. Then, using a broad, stiff paintbrush or a simple garden sprayer, you apply that liquid heavy and deep onto bare, unpainted wood. You soak the lower ends of your fence posts before they go into the earth, the underside of your porch steps, or the structural beams inside a woodshed. The wood drinks in the mineral-laden water, and as it dries, the borax crystals remain locked deep inside the wood fibers. When a termite or a carpenter ant attempts to chew into that treated timber, the mineral destroys the microscopic organisms in the insect's gut that allow it to digest wood cellulose in the first place. The insect cannot feed, and the colony stops its tunneling entirely. This protection will last for many years, provided the wood is not subjected to the constant, direct washing of the driving rain. It is a simple, honest shield for your timber that costs pennies compared to the store-bought alternatives. Moving back into the garden rows, the seventh use addresses a trouble that every grower faces when the humid days of midsummer arrive. Powdery mildew. It is that gray-white, dusty fungus that appears overnight on the leaves of your squash, pumpkins, cucumbers, and zinnias, spreading so fast that it can choke out a vine before the fruit has time to ripen. To check this gray bloom before it ruins your harvest, you mix a specific foliar spray. You take 1 gallon of clean water and add exactly 1 level teaspoon of borax powder, along with 1 tablespoon of ordinary cooking oil. You shake that container hard until the oil breaks up and the powder is completely dissolved. In the early morning hours, before the hot sun hits the garden, you spray this mixture thoroughly over both the tops and the undersides of the affected leaves. The borax slightly shifts the pH level of the leaf surface to a point where the fungus spores simply cannot survive or multiply, while the cooking oil acts as a natural sticker, helping the solution cling to the slick surface of the leaf through the morning dew. If you apply this remedy 3 times, spacing the sprayings about 4 days apart, you can check the disease completely and watch the new, clean green growth emerge from the center of the vine. The 8th use is for the stone paths, the cracks in the concrete driveway, and the edges of the brick patio where you want absolutely nothing to grow. Mind me close on this, for we are returning to the herbicidal power of a concentrated mineral salt. You never, under any circumstances, use this method inside your vegetable beds or near the roots of your prized rose bushes, because it will kill any green thing it touches without discrimination. But for the stubborn crabgrass, the deep-rooted dandelions, and the creeping Charlie that push their way up between your paving stones, you can skip the expensive chemical weed killers that require rubber gloves and a mask. Instead, you dissolve 1.25 cups of borax powder into 1 gallon of warm water. On a dry, sunny day when no rain is forecast, you take a watering can and pour that strong solution directly into the cracks. The weeds will drink the heavy dose of boron, wither down to the root within a week, and the residual salt left in the narrow crevice will keep that crack clean and free of new weeds for the remainder of the growing season. My father kept the perimeter of our milk house perfectly clear, doing nothing more than this every June. The ninth use is a quiet way to handle mice in the garden shed or the grain storage area without using dangerous baits that could harm the barn, cats, or the poultry. Now, let me be perfectly honest with you. Borax does not kill a mouse quickly or directly. It is not an immediate poison for a rodent. However, mice are creatures of habit that rely heavily on their sense of cleanliness, and they have a strong dislike for the texture of fine mineral salts on their paws. If you sprinkle a thick, 2-inch band of dry borax powder directly across the threshold of your shed door, behind the chicken feed bins, or along the top of the foundation walls where the mice like to travel, you create an effective deterrent. When a mouse walks through the powder, the fine dust clings to its feet and fur. The animal immediately feels uncomfortable and will groom itself to remove the substance, swallowing a small amount of the drying mineral, which upsets its system. The mice quickly learn that your shed is a troublesome, uncomfortable place to live, and they will pack up and move along to the woods, leaving your grain bags whole. It is a clean way to defend a perimeter by simply making the environment hostile to their habits. Let us step down into the cellar for the 10th use, a place where the dampness of the earth often brings a musty, heavy smell that lingers all through the winter months. In the old days, cellars weren't just utility rooms. They were the lungs of the house, where the potatoes, cabbage, and winter apples were kept sweet and sound. If mold and mildew take hold of those stone or timber walls, the spores will quickly ruin your stored food. Instead of buying those expensive plastic spray bottles of commercial mildew remover, which are mostly chlorinated water and chemical fragrances that taint the air, you can rely on the long-lasting power of this mineral. You mix 1 full cup of borax powder into 1 quart of boiling water, stirring it until the liquid is heavy and saturated. Then, taking a stiff bristled scrubbing brush, you work that hot mixture directly into the damp stone brick or rough timber walls where the black mold spots try to start. Now, here is the important detail. You do not rinse it off with clean water. You leave it right there to dry. As the water evaporates, it leaves behind a microscopic, invisible layer of borax crystals, embedded deep within the pores of the stone or the grain of the wood. That mineral layer dries out any new spores that try to land and take root, stopping the mold cycle before it can ever establish itself. My grandmother scrubbed the cellar steps and the stone foundations with this mixture every April without fail, a yearly ritual as sure as the spring itself, and her cellar never smelled close or musty. It smelled like clean, cool stone, keeping the harvest sweet until the new garden came in. Now we arrive at the 11th use, the one almost nobody outside the old farm communities remembers today, and it is the very reason I wanted to share this knowledge with you. It concerns the coddling moth, the worm in the apple, the single most frustrating pest for anyone trying to keep a small home orchard. If you have ever picked a beautiful red apple from your tree, only to find a brown, messy tunnel running right through to the core, you have met the work of the coddling moth larvae. The modern garden catalogs will tell you that the only way to save your fruit is to buy expensive pheromone traps, sticky bands for the trunks, and chemical sprays that must be applied 6 or 7 times a season according to a strict calendar. Here's what the old orchard men did instead, for pennies, using the plain box from the cupboard. In the deep quiet of late winter, before the tree buds even begin to swell, which is late February in the south and late March up north, the young coddling moth larvae are overwintering down in the rough, flaky crevices of the bark near the base of the trunk. As the days warm, they wake and begin their long crawl up the trunk toward the newly forming buds and blossoms, where they will lay their eggs and ruin the young fruit. To stop them completely, you mix a thick paste of borax powder and warm water, blending it until it reaches the consistency of heavy cream or thick whitewash. You take a wide, coarse paintbrush and paint a continuous, solid soda of this white paste right around the main trunk of the apple tree. You start about 1 foot off the ground and paint it all the way up to about 3 feet high, making sure to work the paste deep into every rough crack and split in the bark. As the insects attempt to make their spring migration up into the canopy, they are forced to cross this heavy mineral barrier. The borax destroys the soft-bodied larvae on contact, clearing the tree of the pest before they ever reach a single leaf or blossom. One afternoon, 1 brush and a few spoonfuls of powder from a $2 box will give you a clean harvest that the commercial companies claim requires a whole shelf of expensive bottles. It is a quiet, simple victory of traditional knowledge over modern expense. Look at the whole picture now. Every one of these 11 uses costs you next to nothing. Yet against every single one of them, the modern store sells you a specialized bottle or bag at $10, $20, or $40, which you must buy again and again every season. The reason you were never taught the versatility of this plain box is simple. There is no fortune to be made in selling a cheap mineral dug straight from the desert floor. You cannot patent it, you cannot corporate brand it, and you cannot charge a premium for it. So the knowledge simply drifted out of the common awareness, left unsaid because no one profited by saying it. But there is a quiet freedom in looking to your own cupboard first when trouble comes to your garden or your home. The household that reaches for the plain, honest box before the colorful catalog is the household that remembers how to truly manage a piece of land. I want to hear how the season is treating your own place. Tell me in the comments below which pest or trouble has been winning the war in your garden this year, and which of these old remedies you intend to try. Give me your county and your climate too, for the pests change with the geography, and I like to understand the soil you are working. Next time we meet out here by the shed, I want to show you what a single cup of plain wood ash from the hearth does to the most stubborn weed in the American lawn, a cheap thing from the fire that does what the expensive jugs cannot. Until then, keep your measures level, keep your tools sharp, and respect the old ways. Let us take a step back and look at the foundation of all these remedies, because understanding how the mineral behaves under your hands is what transforms a simple recipe into a reliable craft. When you work with borax on a homestead, you are working with a substance that reacts directly to temperature and moisture. The old people didn't just follow a set of instructions blindly. They watched the weather and they felt the texture of the mixtures they prepared. When you are mixing the sweet ant bait or the concentrated solution for your fence posts, you will notice that the white powder does not dissolve easily in cold well water. If you try to force it, the crystals will simply clump together at the bottom of your jar or bucket, leaving the liquid weak and the bottom full of wasted sediment. You must always start with water that is warm to the touch, about the temperature of a fresh pail of milk. The warmth opens the water, allowing the mineral salts to break down completely until the liquid is as clear as morning dew. If you are preparing the thick paste for the orchard trunks, you want to add the water a few drops at a time, mashing the powder with a flat wooden battle until it loses its graininess and takes on the smooth, heavy slip of potter's clay. The timing of these applications matters just as much as the measure. If you apply the foliar spray against powdery mildew on a hot mid-July afternoon, when the sun is beating straight down on your squash vines, you will scald the leaves, doing more damage in an hour than the fungus could manage in a week. The mineral salt magnifies the heat of the sun. You must wait until the evening shadows have lengthened across the rows, or go out before the birds have finished their first morning song. This gives the liquid time to settle, shift the surface sweetness of the leaf, and dry naturally before the heat of the day arrives. The same care must be taken with the dry rings you place around your cabbages to deter the slugs. If the soil is already soaked through from a 3-day drizzle, the dry powder will draw the moisture up from the earth below, turning into a hard, crusty cake that loses its effectiveness. You wait for a dry spell, when the surface of the dirt is crumbly and light, and you lay the ring down then. It is these small observations, the condition of the soil, the temperature of the water, the hour of the day, that separate a master practitioner from someone who merely guesses. Think about the sheer economy of keeping this one single box on your shelf. A homestead can easily become cluttered with specialized gear, a different plastic jug for the orchard, another for the patio cracks, a specific powder for the carpets, and a line of bottles for the kitchen cabinets. Each one comes with its own chemical scent, its own set of complicated manufacturing processes, and its own high price tag. When you learn to use the plain mineral instead, you are stripping away the noise. You are replacing a dozen commercial dependencies with a single honest substance dug from the earth. This isn't about being stubborn or turning your back on the modern world just for the sake of it. It is about resilience. It is about knowing that if the delivery trucks stop running or the store down in town raises its prices again, your garden will still grow, your timber will still stand solid, and your kitchen will remain clean. The old people didn't have the luxury of convenience, so they cultivated the luxury of knowledge. They knew the properties of wood, the habits of insects, and the temperament of the soil. When you go out to your shed this week, take a look at the shelf where you keep your garden supplies. Notice how many labels are trying to sell you a quick fix, and notice how many of those fixes could be managed by the simple application of a level spoon and a little patience. There is a profound satisfaction in that realization. It gives you a sense of quiet authority over your own place. You are no longer just a consumer of garden products. You are a caretaker who understands the balance of Seder and the utility of plain things. As you try these 11 methods on your own homestead, remember to watch the results closely. Look at the way the ants follow the trail. Observe how the new leaves on your zinnia plants come in clean after the spray. and keep a sharp eye on the level of your measuring spoons. The land responds to a careful hand, and the old ways remain the truest ways because they were forged in necessity and proven over generations. Keep your shelf simple, keep your observations keen, and let the